What is the overall significance to the end of the book of Ruth? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we conclude our verse-by-verse study of the book of Ruth on Walking Through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Ruth 4 verses 13 to 22, but before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, turn to Ruth 4 verse 13, but if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Ruth chapter 4, beginning at verse 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he went in to her, the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, "Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a close relative, and may his name be famous in Israel. And may he be to you a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age, for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is better to you than 7 sons, has borne him." Then Naomi took the child and laid her on her bosom, and became a nurse to him. And the neighbor women gave him a name, saying, "There is a son born to Naomi." And they called his name Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now this is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begot Hezron. Hezron begot Ram. Ram begot Amminadab. Amminadab begot Nahshon. And Nahshon begot Salmon. Salmon begot Boaz. And Boaz begot Obed. Obed begot Jesse. And Jesse begot David. The book of Ruth is a short book, but as we have seen, it teaches us a lot of lessons. One of which is found in this chapter about faithfulness. Ruth's faithfulness to God has been shown throughout the book in her treatment of her mother-in-law Naomi, her integrity in her encounters with Boaz, and for her desire to raise up children who could inherit the land which was Elimelech's in Bethlehem. But this chapter also shows us about Boaz's faithfulness. And as we just read, Boaz is the son of Salmon, and from Matthew 1 verse 5 we find that Salmon's wife was Rahab, the harlot we met in Joshua 2, who was saved through her faith from death when Jericho fell. Being the son of a harlot could have led Boaz to be a wicked man, but it didn't, for it is obvious that Rahab gave up her harlotry when she married Salmon and served God righteously, teachings that were obviously taught to Boaz by both his parents. Boaz was not only faithful to God's law concerning the treatment of the poor and strangers, but he was faithful to God's law concerning levirate marriage. The next of kin to Elimelech was to be given the first opportunity to raise up children with Ruth, but he had to refuse due to the fact that buying Elimelech's land only to have to relinquish it to Ruth's son would impoverish his family. No such impediment existed for Boaz, so not only did he purchase the land from Naomi, but he married Ruth and bore her a son. We don't know how long after the marriage this happened, but I don't believe it was too long, for Naomi was still alive when her grandson Obed was born, and she was able to nurse him. When Obed was born, the whole town of Bethlehem rejoiced in the Lord, for he had not left Naomi without relatives. He had not left her empty, as she had claimed in chapter 1. Saying this is sort of a mild rebuke of Naomi's attitude here, for in how Ruth behaved towards Naomi was better than 7 sons would have been. Of course, that is a figure of speech, but it does show us that Naomi wasn't abandoned by the Lord, in that he had given her a daughter-in-law who not only loved her, but would provide for her through the birth of Obed. With Obed's birth, the city hoped that he would be a restorer of life to Naomi, and that he was in her old age. Coming now to verses 17 to 22, we really get to the author's point to the book of Ruth, to the significance, if you will, which is the book of Ruth is designed to provide the lineage for King David. That the book ends with David and not one of his sons or grandsons lends credence to the idea that this book was written before the birth of Solomon, with Samuel being the likely author. But why would David need a book like this to account for his lineage? We must ask ourselves, who is found in David's lineage? A Canaanite by the name of Rahab, and a Moabite by the name of Ruth. There could be some who claim that David is not really from the tribe of Judah because he has mothers from nations that God didn't want to be among the congregation of Israel. God dealt with the story of Rahab back in the book of Joshua, so Rahab wasn't going to be a problem. The book of Ruth is where God deals with Ruth in order to show that Ruth was a woman of faith who married Boaz, a man of faith in levirate marriage that would bring legitimate children to the house of Judah. Thus, David was a full Israelite and a full child of Judah in spite of one of his female relatives being Moabite. The genealogy of David, though, does present to us a problem that I would like to quickly address. Matthew 1 verse 5 makes it quite clear that Boaz is the literal son of Salmon and Rahab. And Ruth 4:17 makes it quite clear that Obed is the literal son of Boaz and Ruth. The story of Rahab takes place in about 1406 BC, and so Boaz had to have been born around the time of the death of Joshua in about 1370 BC. We've noted numerous times that Boaz was an older man in this book, and so if the book took place in the days of Ehud around 1284 BC, Boaz could be about 85 in this book, not too old for a man to have a child. However, the genealogy says that Obed begat Jesse and Jesse begat David. We're pretty certain from history that David began to reign in about 1010 BC at the age of 30, according to 2 Samuel 5 verse 4. That means that David was born in 1040 BC, 244 years removed from the birth of Obed. Now, even if Obed didn't have Jesse until he was 85, and Jesse didn't have David until he was 85, something I don't believe 1 Samuel will support, that only gives us 170 years, 74 years left unaccounted for. Now, yes, we might fill in some of those gaps by making Obed's birth a little further away from 1284, but making small adjustments in the age of Boaz, Obed, and Jesse is not going to make up 74 years. What I believe this clearly shows us is that, like in other places in Scripture, David's genealogy has been telescoped here in Ruth to only include the important members. Thus, between Obed and Jesse, there could be one or two missing people, something that the text allows because the Bible uses the word begot in not the same way as a father-son relationship like we do today. To give this further credence, I suggest you also look at the genealogy of David from Perez to Salmon. From Exodus 12:41, we know that from the time of when Perez, Judah's son by Tamar, according to Genesis 38:29, when he entered Egypt, to Salmon was 430 years. And yet in between Perez and Salmon are only 4 people, Hezron, Ram, Abinadab, and Nahshon, to cover this amount of history. Back in Exodus, we discussed the reason that genealogies of the captivity of Israel may have been telescoped down to about 4 names, namely that God had prophesied to Abraham back in Genesis 15:16 that it would be in the 4th generation that Israel would leave captivity. What we must realize is that we don't count generations nor keep lists of ancestors the same way the ancients did. Their family trees generally only included people of importance or prominence and were telescoped down in order to serve another purpose, perhaps, that is not always evident to us. When we fail to understand this is when we think that the Bible, especially when it comes to tables of names, is riddled with errors, when it is not. From Perez to Salmon contained 4 names between them in order to signify the fulfillment of God's prophecy to Abraham, with God using generation with Abraham the same way the people of the time did. And then the genealogy at the end of Ruth is meant to show the lineage of David through Boaz and Ruth, and so only the important names that were needed for that are mentioned: Boaz, Obed, and Jesse. Whether there is 1 or 2 missing names is not important, for their names are not important to the point of the end of Ruth, which was the lineage of King David. The people who lived in David's time would have understood this point because they kept genealogies this way. We therefore have to understand these lists this way too, and rejoice in the providence of God, that through the son of a former harlot and a Moabite woman could come one who would be king over all Israel, and ultimately through this man's seed, the Messiah, Jesus, would be born. What a truly powerful and loving God we serve. And so with that, we conclude our verse-by-verse study of the book of Ruth. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's overall review of what was revealed to us in this book as we continue our walk through the Bible, 1 verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.